Three, two.
Hey, hey, hi. Michelle here. Hey, everyone. Just giving a moment as we're going live. Hey. Welcome,
Oh, three.
welcome, welcome. Welcome to AAM's YouTube channel. We have a great program for you tonight. So just saying hello. And if you'd like to say hello back, please do give us a little shout out and say hey in the chat. Let us know where you're YouTubing in from and what you're hoping to get out of tonight's program. We like to know. We love for this. All right, we got some excited and ready folks in the chat, and we certainly like this to be interactive as possible. So we will love to hear from you, your comments and your questions as we go along. But let me get us started now. So welcome, Animal Allies. Tonight I am talking with Justin Jacobs of Debug Your Brain about outreach strategies, video creation, and creative activism. Please hold your questions until later, but we will absolutely welcome them. So my name is Michelle Granberg. For those of you who are new to Animal Activism Mentorship, AAM is a multinational program designed to fully support and empower activists to reach their potential and equip them with the tools, community, and resources they need to boldly participate in our global animal liberation movement. Founded in 2020, AAM offers a free 3-month mentorship program which pairs experienced activists with aspiring activists. You can apply today to become a mentor or a mentee through our website, animalactivismmentorship.com. Additionally, we offer free educational online programs like this one. We have a podcast called the Animal Liberation Hour, and we host large-scale in-person activism events around the country. I hope you're familiar with those. I'm going to announce at least one of those at the end of our program, so stay with us tonight. All right, so now I am so happy to welcome Justin. Welcome, Justin, from Debug Your Brain.
Hello.
Hello.
Good to be here.
Yeah, it's so good to have you. I feel like I should be giving a little bit of your bio, but I don't know, would you like to share anything just to start about yourself in terms of your background and what you do?
Yeah, so what I mostly do is video essays and street outreach on YouTube. I occasionally will actually do interviews with people as well, and I also create content on Instagram. I used to meme, but I've put memeing aside for the time being.
Meme?
Meme, yeah, creating memes.
Memeing.
Yeah, memeing.
It's a verb
Yeah,
now.
it is.
Meaning, to meme.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So let's dive a little into what you do because I really love what you do. I love the content that you're creating and the consistency with you're creating the content and your, dedication and commitment to the animals really comes through. And I know we were talking before we went live about how important it is that we grow this movement and encourage more people to get more active with activism because it is friggin' urgent for the
Mhm.
animals, like beyond urgent. So let's talk about effective street outreach from your experience, from your point of view. Lots of people say lots of things about it. They're all good, all good.
Mhm.
Whatever strategies people use are all good. But just define street outreach for us.
But yeah, street outreach, I think, is just any time that you, as an activist, go out and chat with people in the street about veganism. I guess typically it's in the vein of like trying to convince an individual to go vegan. That typically is what I consider street outreach to be. So like I don't consider a pressure campaign to be street outreach, even though you are on the street sort of outreaching to someone, So yeah, I consider street outreach to be more of a bit of a more of an individual thing, typically a one-on-one or one-on a few conversations.
Yeah, it's a one-on-one conversation, but it's intentional. It has a
Yes.
goal, right?
Hmm.
It's organized in your
Yes.
mind and it's purposeful
Yes.
as it relates
Totally.
to animal liberation, helping people to have some insights and awareness that
Hmm.
they didn't have maybe coming into that conversation. So
Hmm.
how did you get started with doing street outreach and who inspired you?
Yeah. So originally I became vegan during the pandemic from watching Earthling Ed videos. There were clearly things farther back in my past that I think had sort of planted seeds, but watching Earthling Ed videos, specifically his street outreach, his street debates, are kind of what tipped me over the edge to going vegan. Now, when I went vegan, I didn't start doing street outreach immediately, but it was always sort of in the back of my head because I do enjoy talking to people and debating and things like that. So first, what I started doing is just kind of doing video essays. But I kind of had that, that bouncing around in my head. And it's actually, I think the thing that pushed me over the edge to actually do specifically street outreach was a video by Natalie Fulton, where she was talking about how she did street outreach. It was like one of her really, really early videos. Like, oh, this is why I just take a sign out and I give people a cookie and like, this is my camera or whatever. And I think it was just enough. It was just enough of like, oh yeah, of course. There's just a couple like few little logistical hurdles. And just seeing someone else actually like explicate those logistical hurdles was enough to take that hurdle out of my mind, that psychological hurdle that I had. And so then I started doing street outreach in addition to my video essays at that point.
I love that. And Natalie did not start all that long ago either. So you can go a long way, all of us, in a short period of time. That's really what we want to remind people. And shout out to her. Please check out her, Natalie Fulton's. She's one of our mentors. Check out her her YouTube channel as well. And we're going to remind people to go to your YouTube channel after this, Debug Your Brain. So yeah, and Earthling Ed, anybody else who was inspired by Earthling Ed, please share that in the chat, or someone else that you were inspired by. We love to see that. So you have sort of a unique approach, your own approach, and I'm sure that it's a amalgamation of other people's approaches that you are making your own. And it is important, isn't it, to make your approach your own, to own it, and to let it be true to who you are. Otherwise, you feel like you're faking it. You feel like you have to think about it too much. It feels inauthentic, even if other people's styles are good. So talk a little bit about your approach and kind of what it is and why.
Yeah. So I was influenced by a lot of books, but one of them being Influence, but about having better conversations. So there's a book, How to Have Impossible Conversations, Crucial Conversations. There's a book, Motivational Methods for Vegan Advocacy, that's specific to veganism. But even prior to getting into veganism, I was interested in how to have these better conversations because I just saw people talking about all sorts of things, typically political issues, and getting so divided and not being able to really get anywhere. And so it wasn't just veganism that motivated me to do that. I had already kind of had that knocking around in my head as well. And so I kind of wanted to bring that mindset to veganism, or to vegan outreach at least, because, I'd seen a lot of people who that didn't seem like that was the mindset that they were bringing to activism, a little more aggressive approaches, or approaches that were like maybe designed a little more for the algorithm and things like that, which nothing wrong with that. I also enjoyed those videos as well. But I wanted to carve out something slightly different. So I guess you would say probably I kind of lean more towards like the Earthling Ed style of outreach, as opposed to like the Joey Carbstrong, or maybe like the Vegan Gains, maybe all the way over here, But there were a couple of things that I did want to do. I noticed that a lot of times with conversations with veganism, people will start to say things that are just like ludicrous as they pertain to their own values. They'll start saying like, well, I actually don't think it's wrong to hurt animals, or even maybe more epistemic things like, I don't think animals can feel pain. And once you're in that territory of like philosophical purgatory, it's really hard to get out of it. And so what I wanted to design my outreach to do was to sort of short circuit those sorts of like obvious defensiveness and rationalizations in the beginning. So, I typically will ask these questions up front to establish these values that basically everyone has, so that they can't like recant on them later, So, sometimes I'll say something like, is it okay to punch a pig in the head for sensory pleasure? Is it okay to punch a dog in the head for sensory pleasure? Of course, everyone says no. And then I'll ask them why. And they're like, oh, well, dogs and pigs can feel pain. And I'm like, well, can they also feel emotions? They get scared? Yeah, they do feel scared, blah, 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 And of course, virtually everyone I ask says it's wrong to hurt animals. Animals can feel pain and animals can feel emotions. The key is, this is before I bring up veganism, right? Because if you just come at it with veganism, then you see people just denying all those facts, and the thing is it's just far too high of a percentage I was seeing of people denying those facts. And I'm like, I just know this isn't reflective of what the population actually believes. And so obviously this is a rationalization, obviously this is defensiveness. And so by preloading those questions, you just get those out of the way and you don't have to have these really, really silly discussions about things that the person doesn't believe. So that's kind of like the first part of the first thing I developed in my outreach, I would say. After that, I did want to show footage. So I think the other thing is these outreach conversations often get kind of heady and philosophical and kind of abstract, right? But our brains, we want to talk to the brain, but we also want to talk to the heart. And so all this heady discussion, we're doing lots of talking to the brain, but how much are we talking to the heart? And one thing is that the footage talks to the heart. The footage is an emotional experience for the person. And so I wanted to start, starting off those questions, get their values first. Okay, cool. The values are done. Now I want them to see a video, take it out of this abstract realm and take it into the concrete and the emotional realm. Let them see the footage, right? And then ask them how they feel, right? So once they see the footage, rather than jumping right into like, wow, you're an animal abuser, right? So why are you abusing these animals, right? I just want to know how they feel. Like, what are they feeling when they see that? Are they feeling disgusted? Are they feeling sad? Are they feeling angry maybe? Are they feeling ashamed they didn't know it and that they participated in it? And those are really interesting things to get out of people, right? And if you're doing this, I think, correctly, obviously people are always going to feel judged to some degree. But certainly up until this point, we really, really want to be lowering the barriers to them feeling judged at all. We want their authentic responses to both the questions, but also to like seeing the video. And we want to know what their authentic emotions are, right? And so from there, that's typically when I get more into like, well, what would be stopping you from going vegan, right? And it's only at that point that we get to like the objections, like, oh, well, price, convenience, whatever. But at this point, we're already probably about, I don't know, 3 to 5 minutes deep into the conversation. They already have their values. They've already seen the video. And now all the rationalizations and the defensiveness that people typically have, a lot of the wind is taken out of those sails at this point because of all the upfront work that we've done, right? And so that's kind of my strategy generally going through it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I just want to say that again, just so I get it and everybody sort of gets it in terms of, you're wanting to delay their defensiveness, prevent it if possible, because once they get defensive, it squashes the conversation and it makes the conversation, it takes it down a different road. It gives it a different tone when they're getting so defensive and they feel like we're putting them on the defensive. So asking these questions up front, you're just asking them for their thoughts and feelings about things, and you're establishing that and making that the tone, and helping them get them out of their heads, like get them as much out of their analyzing intellectual mode and get them into their hearts, into their empathy. It will hopefully be a much more productive conversation if they can keep talking, from that space. And then the questions you ask are formulated deliberately, but they are open-ended questions, right? Versus closed questions. They're open-ended and it's more the Socratic method. So can you talk a little bit more about the questions themselves and maybe give us some more examples of ones that you've developed?
Yeah, so some are open and some are closed.
Okay.
Oftentimes, if there's a closed question, I'll follow up with an open question. The very first questions I asked were just like a simple true false, like it's okay to punch someone in the head if it gives you sensory pleasure. And they say no. I say, okay, it's okay to punch a punching bag if it gives you sensory pleasure. They say, well, yes, that's okay. It's okay to punch a pig if it gives you, or a dog if it gives you sensory pleasure. They say definitely not. And then the final one is it's okay to punch a pig if it gives you sensory pleasure. And that's usually when like it starts to dawn on the people. They're like, oh, okay, so I see where this is going. You know what I mean? They're like, okay, well, no. So those are all closed-ended questions. But then I'm like, okay, but why is it bad? And so that's an open-ended question. And that allows them to kind of explain what it is about their value system that doesn't align with. What's nice there is that we can get what their values are, but we can also start to pick apart some potentially like empirical misunderstandings. So, some people will say, well, they can feel pain, and I'll be like, yeah, okay. And so feeling pain is bad generally, like, yeah. And I'm like, anything else? And they're like, I don't know, like, can they feel emotions? I don't know. Can they feel emotions? Sometimes they'll say that, or I'll prompt them. I'll be like, well, what about emotions? Do you think they feel scared? And they'll be like, I don't know, do animals feel scared? And so even there, I could just be like, yes, the scientific evidence says that they feel scared. But that's not as good as continuing to probe questions. The thing is, you can't, in some deep sense, you can't really change someone else's mind. They have to change their own mind. And that works best by them working through these problems themselves, you know. And this is true just in general. Like, for instance, even if I was teaching you calculus, this doesn't have to have like a moral valence to it. If I'm teaching you, calculus, or I'm asking you like to analyze this great piece of literature, it works better if I'm asking you questions and having your brain actually practice and work through the problems. Things they're gonna be more memorable, they're gonna stick better, but you're also gonna like process them in a deeper way. And so rather than just being like, well, the scientific evidence says that animals do feel fear and emotions, blah, blah, blah. I'll just be like, yeah, do you have any animals at home, or did you grow up with like a dog or a cat or anything? And they'll be like, oh yeah. I'm like, oh, what was their name? You know, were they a boy or girl? And then I'll be like, well, did they get like excited when you came home? Were they ever like super excited about that? And they're like, oh yeah, they were excited. I'm like, well, what did they do? Oh, they like wagged their tail a lot and jumped up and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, did anything like scare them? And they're like, oh, I don't know. Like, well, like, what about like the vet? Did they like going to the vet? And they're like, oh no, they did get really scared. Or what about when it was like thundering out? You know, did they get scared then? Oh yeah, they did get scared. And so I think like walking them through it and having them explain it, always better. Extra points if this can be a personal, somehow like a personal story or something tied to their personal narrative. And people tend to be very attached to the animals they have in their home, you know. And so this is getting them to think it through. It's making it relevant to them. It's directly relevant to their life, and it has a pretty good emotional valence because people love the animals that are in the house with them generally, you know. And that can trend a little into like getting people to tell stories. If you can really get them to like go into a story, that's really good. We don't always have time for it, obviously. You know, sometimes these interactions are pretty quick. But even to give like just a little mini story, like what were they like when you took them to the vet or whatever? They say, oh, whenever we took him to the vet, he would do X, Y, Z. That's at least a mini story that you're getting them to tell and relate to you. And so, any way that you can do that and get them to walk through it themselves and figure it out themselves and just kind of remember something themselves that they already knew, always better, I think. So.
Yeah, it serves a lot of purposes, asking those questions. And, of course, you want to elicit some personal information from them so you can feed that back to them, so you can start a discussion and have a genuine dialogue with them. But, even just people want to be heard. They want to talk. Most people like to talk when someone's really listening. And so if you are listening, then you're also, building rapport with them, which is going to make the rest of the conversation much easier, much more flowy, and a much more genuine connection, when they feel like, so it serves a lot of different purposes, not to jump right in, not to right away. It's hard. I find myself having the impulse right away to start educating,
Yeah,
forcing stuff down their throat. No, and just making statements. And it's always harder in the moment. It's easier to talk about it now, what might be best. And so for me to stand back and you're good at waiting and listening and letting the responses come fully without interrupting them. Sometimes I interrupt when I'm doing outreach, and I have to always manage all of that. So how do you do with that? And I know we were talking a bit before, how do you not get triggered? Not how do you not get triggered? You get triggered, but how do you manage when you get triggered? What sometimes does trigger you? You seem to remain relatively stoic, which is a positive trait. It's a strength. We can all develop stoicism, which doesn't mean we're cut off from our emotions at all. It means we just can manage them and stay not without emotion, but stay kind of middle of the road when we're having that conversation. Is that what sort of is?
Yeah. I think you touched on it a little there too. Something I didn't talk about was the building rapport. So something you don't see in my videos is before the conversation even starts, I often build rapport with the person. So I say, hey, what's your name? It's my name. Do you live here? Do you live in Durham? Do you live in Raleigh? Oh, nice. You're visiting. Da-da-da. Oh, I've been there. You know what I mean? Like build a little rapport. And then I always ask them, like almost always ask them what they're passionate about. So I think that's always like a really nice question to ask. Like, what's your job? I don't like it as much because a lot of people aren't passionate about their job. I want to know like another core value before we even get into the discussion. And I also like people like talking about their passion. So this is an inherently rapport building question. And what you'll find oftentimes, the other thing that this question does that's nice, is that people are often passionate about something that's relational in some way, some sort of social relation, some sort of like pro-social behavior, helping people, something like that. And that can also help give you something to graft onto later, when they're kind of talking, maybe they have some objection later. And you're like, I know you said earlier that you really like helping people in need, and these animals are definitely in need. And sometimes I'll just like let it hang there, like with like nothing, you know what I mean? Something like that. And it'll really get them, they're like, that's true. Like, again, that's another way that this actually fits my values rather than, fights them. And so building rapport in the beginning, and then like you said, listening, something like I think of a couple like maxims that I go into outreach with. And one of them is talk less, listen more. And for many reasons, like I said before, the Socratic method tends to make them learn better. They remember the information better. But the other thing is like you said, it's inherently rapport building. Listening to someone and actually like not interrupting them, and interrupting people a lot is rapport destroying, right? So listening is probably the easiest, most generalizable way to build rapport, right? So I think just talk less, listen more is probably one of the single best pieces of advice I'd give to people. And it's easier said than done. Okay, but how does that relate to your question? The rapport building in the beginning, I often think we look at rapport building as, I want to have a strong rapport with them so that they don't get defensive and they don't shut down, right? But rapport building is a mutual thing. If you're not interrupting them and you're listening a lot, most people will naturally also not interrupt you as much and listen more, right? And if I ask them about their passions or like where they're from, oftentimes they'll give me a little question back. Oh, like, are you from here too? Da, 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 da. So the rapport building is reciprocal. And if I have rapport with someone, then I see them as more of a three-dimensional person. I see them as someone who has flaws, but also has things to recommend them, right? Also has virtues. They have virtues and vices. And so that rapport building can also help you to not get as triggered, right? Or when you do get triggered, you can kind of say like, look, this is a three-dimensional person. This is not just an avatar of evil who hates animals and is going to do anything at their disposal to abuse animals, right? So I think that's really a big thing. But also just thinking about myself, like I wasn't always vegan. There was, I haven't always been a perfectly ethical, moral person. And so I understand that this is just, we're all humans, we're messy, right? And I'm getting this person for a slice, a 5 to 10 minute slice of their life. Maybe they're in a really bad mood. Maybe they just had an argument with their partner. Maybe they just got fired from their job, right? And they're not in the most open-minded space. Maybe they want to be combative, right? Maybe they've been drinking a little. I've spoken with some people who clearly had alcohol in their system,
Me too.
And so, I try not to put so much on them as like, I tend to try to think in verbs rather than nouns. So like this, well, can I curse on here or should I not curse?
If you're feeling it, go ahead.
Like, okay, so like I would think of, I don't want to think like this person is an asshole. I think they're being a jerk in the moment, right? Or they're doing something jerky at this instant, but they're not a bad person. So I'm thinking more in verbs and in moments rather than in nouns and in these like, immutable characteristics that they have. And so I think things like that kind of soften me to people when I'm chatting with them, and when they start to say really like things that I think are really horrible, like morally repugnant. I think that helps kind of like turn the volume down on those for me.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I say doing activism, of course, it's to help the animals, but it helps us develop just soft skills that you might not have developed, like personal development, and just become a better communicator because of what's at stake, we're trying to amp up our skills in that way. So, and I like what you were saying, how rapport building goes both way. And it's really like accelerated getting into a relationship with them, like a friendly, not friends, but a friendly, acquaintance type relationship pretty quickly, so that there is a back and forth. So there's some investment. And I always say that a good outreach conversation, it's a high. Like I
Mhm.
always feel a little high after that. I want more of them. Once I have one good one, I'm like,
Yeah, yeah.
where are the people? Where are they? I want to have another. It's
Mhm.
such a, you're in a bubble with someone, and you encounter each other for this little window of time, but it's meaningful. Like
Mhm.
sometimes those conversations are more meaningful than a conversation I've had in like weeks
Yeah.
or something like that. It's really great. So how much of this outreach stuff can be learned and there's skill involved? And what I encourage people if they're new with this is to shadow someone and to
Mhm.
watch the videos and to watch people in real life and model after them. How much of it also, Justin, is instinct and confidence and being non-judgmental, maybe coming from that higher sort of zoomed out view, like you were talking about, seeing them as a whole
Mhm.
person with issues and a life before them, before they got there.
Yeah, I tend to be someone who think a lot can be learned. I mean, obviously, there's going to be different dispositions that people come to this with. Some people just like talking to people more. Some type people like talking in like a sort of combative frame more. But I think a lot of this can really be learned. But a lot of it really is mindset, because if you have the right mindset and you have good patterns of thinking, the rest will flow naturally. Now, it's not easy to develop those good mindsets. So in the interim, I think you can just kind of follow some like basic heuristics. So like, I think there's a couple things, like if you're going to do street outreach, right? So the first thing you have to do is just know the anti-vegan debunks. That's baseline. And you have to know like the most common ones for sure. If you don't know those, then I think you are potentially going out and maybe being a little damaging, because if you have a conversation with someone and they're bringing up these deep or these excuses, and you have no good response to them, then I think they're going to walk away feeling much stronger that, oh, not being vegan is totally justified. So the first thing is to just know those anti-vegan debunks. After that, though, I think is when you're trying to sort of upgrade these other, like as you say, softer skills, right? So one thing I think about is I try to be friendly, curious, and challenging. So those are like the three words I kind of try to remember. I think of these as like three legs of a stool. And if like one of those legs gets knocked out, the stool gets wobbly and kind of falls over. So friendly would just be kind of like the stuff I was talking about in the beginning, rapport building, asking where they're from, what their passions are, maybe joking a little bit, having a generally friendly and smiley demeanor, right? That's friendly. Curious is slightly different. This is when you are asking them questions, you want to actually embody curiosity. So you actually are interested in what they're passionate about. You're actually interested in what their answer is to, punching a dog, or, I didn't go over some other ones. Like, you can say, what do you think about the quote, with great power comes great responsibility, right? Actually being curious about how they answer that question. And a lot of people answer it the same way, but some people really throw you a curveball. And it's really fun when someone does throw you this like weird answer that you've never thought about before. So like get excited about that. Um, that curiousness really, I think, communicates your authenticity and communicates that like this is a collaborative process we're in, and this is actually two humans having like an experience together, rather than someone just like talking at you or going through a script. And then challenging, of course, is this is the thing I think probably people have less of a problem with who are outreachers, which is actually challenging the person's belief, holding them accountable, pressing them on answers they give that maybe don't make sense or you think don't align with their values. So like if you pull one of those legs out, things get kind of weird. So if you just pull challenging out and you're just friendly and curious, now you're kind of in the realm of like pick me vegan, maybe was what we'd say. Like maybe you're not pushing them enough to actually inspire them to think this is a big deal or to change. If you pull the friendliness out and you're just kind of like curious and challenging, that can be like a little intimidating for people. You know what I mean? I think that might be where you start to draw out defensiveness, where you're leaning more towards that challenging side. And like I said, I think if you pull out that curious leg, friendly and challenging can be good, but that's when I think you run the risk of seeming inauthentic and as if I'm just like reading off my questions off of a clipboard and I'm checking boxes like, yep, I asked you that, I asked you that, I asked you that. It can feel a little wooden, stilted. And so that's kind of like a broad mindset that I want to bring to the outreach. So that's kind of top level broad mindset. And then like foundational, I want to know where are all the debunks and how do I respond to them. Sandwiched in between that is ways to respond to the debunks that aren't just me doing a call response. It's not just like, oh, well, it's natural. And me saying, okay, well, lions eat the babies of other tribes. So if it's natural, does that mean that that's good? Blah, blah, blah. Here, right? Rather than just like firing that off at them, I like to sometimes use a slightly different strategy. Sometimes I will just answer them because sometimes that is just the best way to go. But I like to do something I call agree, ask, answer. And so what that is whenever they give an objection, I'll try to find something to agree with, or at least some way to like validate that as a concern.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'll ask them a follow-up question. And then depending on how they answer that, I might ask them another follow-up. And only if they can't get to the answer themselves, only then do I answer. So it's like agree, ask, answer, maybe. So for instance, like a common one we get is, well, it's part of my culture, or we've been doing it for a really long time, right? So agreeing, I would say something like, yeah, that is true. We have been eating animals for a really long time, right? That's the agree part. The next part is the ask. So do you think that because we've done something for a long time that makes it okay? Like, can you think of anything else that we've done for a long time throughout history that wasn't okay? Right? So that's the agree, then the ask. Now, almost everyone will be able to fill something in there. And oftentimes with a question like that, the answer is so obvious, people don't even like say what the answer is. They don't even fill in something. They just go, yeah, good. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Now sometimes they will say something, but yeah, you typically at that point, they'll sort of answer the question themselves. So, rather than just saying, just because we did something for a long time doesn't make it okay, rather than just firing that off, if you agree, ask, answer, again, you're engaging them more. You're also validating this as an actual concern. Like sometimes I'll say like, yeah, it's true. This is part of our culture. And it is hard when something's part of our culture, we have a really strong emotional attachment to it and it makes it hard to give up. But like, but does that make it okay? And we can go into something like that. Like something I said to people recently, I was like, yeah, I have some older members of my family, like my great grandparents or stuff, because they were saying, well, it's like familiar to me. And I was like, they had stuff that was like very familiar to them, back in the day. And sometimes they still express that with familiarity today. And I didn't even like mention, like say what exactly it is I'm talking about. And the people were like, yeah, okay. So that was like an example of me relating a story and not even getting to the point where I'm asking a question and they're already like, okay, I see where this is going now. So I think that's a nice way to come at some of these questions. It also helps break it up a little bit. You can't do that with every question or the conversation would be like 5 hours long and it probably would just get annoying. But for some of the questions, I think you definitely should try that at least and see if it's something that works for you. I've always found it to be really good. I rarely use that method and I'm like, damn, I should have just answered the question. So I hope that made sense. I know that was a long answer.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I like the way you're creating these, affirmations or mantras and remind yourself how you boil them down to three words, And you said ask, agree, ask, answer, and be friendly, curious, and challenging. That's what we need, these little mnemonic cues to remind us how to stay sort of on our game in that way. And it's funny because I was going to put you on the spot and say, can you list off the most common fallacies like that, and some of the categories or what they are and how they sound for people, but you did actually mention a bunch of them, and maybe in the chat folks can do that little bit of homework right now and list the most common fallacies. And which one for you is the have you find to be the most common, or which is the easiest, or which is the hardest? Which one makes you want to just roll your eyes back in your head and you have to control your eyeballs from rolling? Like here it is again.
Yeah. Is that question to me or the chat?
To you.
That's to me. Okay.
To both.
Yeah. So I think, I guess the most common ones to me that I hear, these are like the 4 that I think you need to have good answers to these. You need to go into every outreach knowing these 4 are going to come up and having like a pretty solid response to them. Appeal to nature fallacy. So it's just natural, appeal to tradition and culture. We've done it for a long time, or it's part of my culture. You need animals to be healthy, and veganism is expensive. Veganism expensive is probably the it doesn't quite fit with the other ones because this is more of like a logistical concern,
Mm.
but it does come up so often, at least certainly recently in my recent outreaches. It's I would say it comes up at least 60% of the conversation, 70% maybe. Um, so yeah, those are the four that I would really dial in and make sure you have an answer to, because you're going to hear them all the time.
Mm.
As far as ones that annoy me, I really don't like this concept of we just need to focus on systemic change. And sorry, I should say, I do like the concept of focusing on systemic change. I do think we should be focusing on systemic change, but I also think we should be focusing on individual change.
Mm.
The reason that this response annoys me, I think, is because it comes from people who otherwise seem to be very compassionate and caring, and it even cloaks the excuse in a way that seems like very progressive and caring and empathetic. It's like I really do care. Like I'm with you, but it's just like systemic change is really like what we need to do, and it does just strike me as so, like it strikes me obviously as an excuse. The person just doesn't want to change, and so they're sort of like passing this off onto systemic change.
Mm.
And that one just annoys me. I think for that reason, it's one that really induces a big eye roll from me. I think too, like I've never seen systemic and individual change as having this really harsh, high contrast line between them,
Mm.
right? The border between them seems more porous to me, and we were talking about before. I did like a little Instagram reel about this, where if you press people on this, when someone says that, you're like, okay, yeah, I understand some people are more, they're more into systemic change. We're actually doing, a fur protest this Friday. Do you want me to, do you want me to give you my contact info? And people are like, oh no, I don't, I'm not really. That's kind of weird. And it's like, okay, well, like, you can give money to like animal charities and sanctuaries and things like that. Like, I can give you, I can give you a link or whatever. It's like, money's sort of tight right now, and you can go through these systemic things, and those same people will very likely not want to engage in the systemic action either, because engaging in systemic action is itself an individual action that you take. So it's like to go and affect systemic change still involves you, the individual, having to do some sort of thing in your life, make at least some sort of sacrifice, be it time, money, emotional resources, cognitive resources, whatever. So yeah, that one just really annoys me. I probably don't know exactly why, like all the underlying psychology is probably some childhood trauma or something. But yeah, that one definitely triggers me. Yeah.
You've been doing outreach since what, you were like 6 or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's
I've been hearing this systemic excuse my whole life.
Yeah, the whole the fatalistic, I think they call it, sort of fallacy, where people will say, I'm just one person.
Mhm.
What can I do? Right.
Yeah.
As well. And you're sort of saying, right, and all movements in our history started with a very small grassroots, right? From
Mhm.
bottom up. So yeah, but so certainly we get that a lot, but we continue to plant seeds. But let's talk. We'll take questions really shortly, I think. But I wanted to talk a bit about creating videos, which I know is could be a whole training in and of itself. And here we are in the video age.
Yeah.
To say that is like an understatement. The advent of phones that have cameras in them is now ubiquitous and normal, and
Yeah.
everybody's got them, but you can do so much with them, so much good, and that's why we use them. But how did you start? I think maybe you shared how you made the leap because you saw others doing it and saw how effective it is. But how have you grown in terms of creating video content? What mistakes have you made? What's the learning curve? What was the learning curve? Maybe you're still in the learning curve. What
Mm.
tips can you give newbies?
Yeah, I would say I'm definitely still in the learning curve. This is probably the thing I feel least like qualified to talk about, but I can definitely give some basic stuff. So as far as making videos, I would check out free video editing software, or if you have the means, you can just buy a monthly subscription somewhere. If you want to get something like Final Cut Pro or Premiere Pro or something, I think those typically run 10, 20, maybe $30 a month. If you've got the money and you really think you're going to want to do this and get into video editing, you can check those out. But there's definitely free versions, and you can even get free versions of like Premiere Pro and things like that. whatever one you choose, I would then recommend just going on YouTube and searching for tutorials of like, how do I start in Premiere Pro? How do I start in DaVinci Resolve, or whatever it is that you're going to use? Canva maybe is another one. If those, again, if you have a little more money, disposable income, you can check out something like Skillshare or Udemy. I'm sure there's many others too, but those are like online courses. Skillshare and Udemy, they do all sorts of courses on anything you could think of. If you want to do astrophysics or pottery or whatever, they'll have courses for you. But they certainly will have courses for video editing. Those typically, again, depending if you have deals and stuff, I think Skillshare might be like $20 a month. Udemy courses, if you get them on sale, maybe be like $20, $30, $40. Those will typically be better than YouTube because they'll be super structured lessons. They'll be more like what you would get like, at a college or a school or something like that. So you can sort of think about either one of those. The big thing I would say though is you don't want to get in this loop of watching too many tutorials and too many how-to videos. You want to actually start doing. So, 1 to 3 hours of how-to videos is like fine. That's enough. If you watch 3 hours of how-to videos and you haven't actually like downloaded the program and like actually put your hands in there and started doing stuff with it yet, do that, because you're going to learn the most by doing. You will, these videos definitely help in the beginning to sort of like get your mind around exactly how this works. But you're going to be wanting to be using them in tandem. So you watch some videos, how it works, then you actually download the program, you start editing, and then maybe you have a specific question. Oh, wait, how do I do this? Then look that up on YouTube, or look this up on YouTube, So you want to actually be doing as you want to physically be doing it as you're also learning it more abstractly. This kind of goes back even to, what we're talking with outreach. It can't all be abstract theory, right? You have to actually be processing this information in a real way. And the same goes for making videos. So yeah, that's the big thing I would say with video editing. You're also going to want to try to learn pretty quickly, do you like video editing? Because video editing can be quite time consuming and hard. And so it might be that you maybe want to delegate that to someone else. Maybe someone in your life who's really good at video editing. I'm sure there's a lot of activists who would like to video edit, but don't really want to be the face of an operation. And so just linking up and seeing if you can find someone who wants to do that, I think is also really good. That can also save you a ton of time. If you have someone who can video edit, then you don't need to do it. You don't need to download the free software. You don't need to pay $20 for Premiere Pro. You don't need to watch a bunch of tutorials, right? You can just throw that all off your plate. You got someone to video edit. You're the face. They're the editor. Cool. You're a team. And that's something I think is like really underrated, actually, and something I need to do more myself, but is linking up with other people who have diverse skill sets, right? Because I think a lot of people come onto YouTube and they try to do it all. And that's what YouTube is. It's like, okay, I need to become a subject matter expert. I need to know how to do production. So I need to know how to film things and make them look good. I need to know how audio works. Then I need to go in and figure out how to actually edit the video so that when I cut all this together, it looks good. And then I also need to figure out how to do marketing. Like, what about the thumbnail and the title? Thumbnail and title are super, super important for views, right? And so you as a single person trying to take on the skill set that like a company would have like 10 or 15 people for, it can definitely feel intimidating, Yeah. And so I think the thing is you definitely, if you can, reach out to people who have expertise in some of those areas, and that can definitely help. If not, just start doing it. Like the biggest thing is like, you don't want to wait until your thumbnail and your title and your video editing are perfect to post your first video, right? If you want to start YouTube, you want to get it decent enough and then just post it. Okay. There's a saying in the YouTube space that your first video is your worst video, right? So like, yeah, you have to not be too attached to that first video. Look at the first couple videos you do, not as these like crystallized pieces of art that are going to go in a museum somewhere, right? They're a practice run. They're your training, And so I think seeing them like that can help kind of get you over that hump. So those are the couple of things I'd say is like, start to get your hands dirty as soon as you can. Don't wait forever to post your video. Post the videos as soon as it's like mildly coherent. And then if you can, definitely try to link up with other people and do this as a team, because that can really, really, really reduce a lot of the stress and pressure and the dauntingness of the task.
Mm, I love that. Those are great inspirations that you're saying, and some good tips in there. And I think our audience is generally forgiving anyway, right? Because we know we're in the age of people are not professionals,
Yes.
putting we're beyond that, when there was a time when only professionals would do video editing and video creation. Now we know everybody who's doing is generally just just like you, figuring it out, as they go and getting better, and people are generally forgiving, in regard to that. But definitely there's a whole, I just wanted to read you a couple of the comments.
Sure.
We'll do more questions in a bit, but from what you were saying, so Sean was saying, I make graphs for Reddit. Not sure if that counts. Sure, that counts. That counts.
Definitely counts.
That's stuff.
Definitely counts.
Travis says,
Yeah.
I need some help with creative content creation. I have some animal liberation musical lyrics I want to put video to. And he asks, is there stock footage we can use? I know of We Animals Media. Anything else? And Testify Redeem was saying there are paid ones like Adobe stock, but sometimes you can find free stock footage. Anything to add?
Yeah. So again, so for mine, I do have a paid service in Envato Elements. That's pretty expensive though. I was making some like very like intense, high quality videos, but there are free ones. Pexels, spelled Pexels, they have both photos and videos stock, and so that's a really nice one. And I think, like someone said, there are definitely animal rights groups that have stock footage. So yeah, those are all really good to use. What else can you do? You can also, yeah. So you're not technically supposed to do this. You can find, you know, programs that download YouTube videos, right? And so because sometimes you need to reference another YouTube video in your video. So those sorts of programs will download YouTube videos, and then you can take clips from them and put them in your video. This can get dicey sometimes. So generally, that's it, as long as you're like commenting on the video, or this is like some sort of commentary or satire or something like that. Yeah, responding to the video, or like, hey, Piers Morgan did XYZ the other day, and this is my response to it. And like you can have Piers Morgan on there. Sometimes they get a little dicey, especially with like anything Disney related. Like if you're like making a commentary and you're like, yeah, like if you were Thor and Thor, like was trying to protect some animals, and you put Thor up there, Disney is pretty litigious. So like Marvel, Star Wars, things like that, those you would want to be careful of if you download if you download YouTube videos, because you can get copyright strikes from that. But most people aren't going to give you copyright strikes unless you're like just taking their video and playing it, and acting as if it's yours.
They don't
so
like
for most
that.
for most commentary stuff, that's another thing you can do, is to sort of fill out your videos and make them more compelling. And again, if you just watch any amount of YouTube, you see people do this all the time. So
yeah, so I'm glad we're sort of getting into YouTube a little bit, which is where we are, and optimizing YouTube, which can be mysterious. And to me, it's mysterious. I don't know all the ins and outs of the, the copyright infringement and all of that. And we certainly want to stay on the truthful track and not get in trouble. But it also doesn't bode well for our mission of helping animals to not hurt humans or steal content from humans, in that way. So we could talk a little bit more about that, what people don't know, or what you've learned about YouTube, or what any other folks in the comments have learned, and any misconceptions about YouTube. But Travis was asking, how about AI? What do you recommend? Do you use AI?
I generally don't. I'm a little late to the game on that. Although I do use it for text-based things. So sometimes I'll use it to get ideas for YouTube titles, or even what I'm going to put on the thumbnail. I haven't used it as far as like, I don't use AI art, and I haven't used like AI audio, like voiceovers and things. Although I know some people have used those to good effect. But it is really, like, ChatGPT is the one I use, and it really is good for bouncing ideas off of. Like, here's a YouTube title I wrote, write it. And I go, write this 10 more times for me, but make it like more clickbaity, or make it less clickbaity, or make it like be a little more angry. And then you'll get a bunch of titles that are like more angry. And most of them will be like, that doesn't really work. But sometimes you'll be like, oh, that actually does sound a little better. Or maybe you'll get a word out of them. You're like, I don't like the whole title, but that word they chose there is much better than the word I had, or that phrasing, you know? And so like you start to get this kind of almost like conversation with the AI where you're giving the AI an idea, it's riffing on that, and then you're riffing on what it gave you. Because maybe you say, give me 10 titles that are like, this is like more clickbaity, right? And I take title number 7 and I'm like, I kind of like that one. So I take 7, I go, take title number 7 and give me 10 more versions of that one. And then you can kind of like refine it down.
Wow.
And this is something that can kind of just like help you like streamline maybe some of the more, I don't know, laborious tasks that you don't like to do.
I wouldn't even know how to, I wouldn't even have thought of how to even ask the questions that get you those answers.
Yeah.
And what do they say? I mean, maybe this is too broad a question, but what titles are the most clickable when it comes to animal rights kinds of videos? What do they recommend?
So what I have noticed personally is some words work better. Like if you have like non-vegan says XYZ or meat eater says XYZ, generally meat eater tends to do better from my experience. So that sometimes there's like certain words that are like synonyms or almost synonyms that just tend to be more clickable. So like I like the word non-vegan better than I like meat eater, and maybe I even like carnist more than I like non-vegan as far as accuracy. But like carnist doesn't get the clicks as far as, at least for me, and non-vegan doesn't get as many clicks. So meat eater, while not as accurate as to like what I'm trying to communicate, gets a lot more eyeballs, right? And of course, in the video itself, I'm not only talking about meat eating. So yeah, there are some things like that that are kind of annoying because you then have to decide between what do I want this to be super accurate, or do I want people to actually click on it? You know what I mean? And so there's always going to be like a tension whenever you're creating titles. And the same is true of like clickbaitiness. Like my least favorite thing to do is make titles and make them clickbaity. But the truth is, making them clickbaity gets way more views and it gets you way more subscribers. And so like, it's just like, you know, and you know, I'll post my stuff to other social media sites also, like doing some self-promotion. And oftentimes, you know, in these other places, people are like, this is clickbaity, I'm mad. Like I like would have subscribed if this wasn't so clickbaity, you know, and that can kind of like get to you, because I myself don't like making the clickbaity title. But the fact is, when you do make the clickbaity title, you just get way more subscribers. Like for every person that's like, I hate this, that it's clickbaity, like 50 more people subscribe because it was clickbaity. So like there is this, it's just this like annoying, like
Catch-22.
It's a frustrating thing. Yeah. That you have to
damned
like play the game like
damned
this.
if you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Like
we've all been pissed off by clickbait where we click on something and it's not at all what you thought it was.
Right.
But it made you click, you know?
Yeah.
And what is the point of creating content if nobody's looking at it, of course? So you're saying the titles need to be evocative and sometimes reverse psychology or I guess trending words.
Yeah. And that's so like that's the thing. I don't, when I say clickbaity, like people, because there's different meanings of clickbaity. Like to me, true clickbait is like the title says something and then the video does not deliver that at all.
Yeah.
Like that's not what the video is even about. So that to me is when it's like gets kind of weird. Now I have done ones before where I'm like, you know, non-vegan destroys vegan, when clearly I feel like I, you know, came off better in the discussion. So that's like the most truly clickbaity I go. But there's other kinds of clickbaity, which is like maybe like the title highlights the absolute worst moment of the discussion. And it's like, you know, non-vegan says that they would kick a dog. And, you know, maybe in the video they do say they would kick a dog, but then like a couple minutes later, they're like, actually, I wouldn't, you know, you've talked me into it, whatever. But I still might make the title non-vegan says they'll kick a dog, right? Because that will get more clicks or whatever. And so it's like that's when you're kind of like, okay, is this clickbaity? Is this, I mean, this is technically true. This is what happens in the video. But like, if I was trying to write my video titles as if they were like titles of a book or a thesis, like, yeah, they're not the same. And I think a lot of viewers are now coming like around to that point that a video title isn't like a thesis statement, you know, but a lot of people think it is like a thesis statement. And then it can be like, well, this is kind of weird, you know?
No, it's meant to pierce through the noise.
Yeah, exactly.
All the static and all the noise and all the competing titles and competing videos. You got yours has to stand out, you know? So this is the world we live in.
Exactly.
What a strange place.
It is,
Strange place.
yeah.
So I want to ask you one more question before we open up for questions from
Mhm.
the chat that there's there. Um, so obviously folks that you do the outreach with, they know they're on camera. What
Mm.
effect does it have, the fact that they know they are and they're aware of the camera? What do you think? How does that affect the dialogue, the conversation positively or negatively? Um, Given that it would be different if there wasn't a camera pointed at both of you.
Yeah. I, I don't know. Sometimes I think it has a big effect on the person, and other times I think the person just completely forgets the camera's there.
I'm sure they
Uh,
forget sometimes. Yeah.
yeah. And so, I recently did outreach with ASAP at University of Pennsylvania, and we had a camera there, but it wasn't as obvious. Like it was just kind of sitting there, and people would come up and talk to you. Whereas with the outreach I typically do, like I actually point at the camera. I'm like, you see, there's a camera there. You know, this is going on YouTube. The people like very much know in my one-on-one outreach, and they didn't so much in the outreach that I did at UPenn. I don't think that it's so obvious that there's a camera there.
Mm.
And honestly, I can't say that the responses were that much different. I feel like overall the conversations went fairly similarly. I had more super combative people at UPenn, but it's hard to disentangle that. I don't know if that's a camera issue. I think it's more that at UPenn, I didn't do this whole thing where like I was like, hey, where are you from? What are you passionate about? Because the sorts of things we were doing were like dog meat or like come up and answer a question. They were more like we got right into the conversation. You know what I mean? You have like Elwood's dog meat there, and you're immediately talking about. They're like, "Oh, you sell dogs?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course we do. Why is that? You think that's weird or something?" And so we're starting from that frame, which is like maybe a sillier frame, maybe like a little like trickstery frame, and and I also couldn't do those questions where I asked the value questions up front, or at least it was a little more awkward to do them. And so at UPenn, I got more like really defensive people and people saying like, it's okay to kick dogs or like, it doesn't matter what happens to animals at all. But I don't think that was a function of the camera. I think it was a function of not having those questions up front and the lack of rapport building. And even that, while there were some people who did that, there were still a ton of people who had really good open-minded conversations, you know.
Mm.
And there were even some people who like didn't know there was a camera. At some point, like I moved the camera because like we were moving and I walked over and like moved it. So they now definitely saw there was a camera. And I didn't feel like in any of those instances that they like really changed what they were saying.
Mm.
However, the times I think that it really does mess you up, some people, just some number of people are going to care about the camera. And I think where it hurts you is not that you get into more defensive, combative conversations, but there's people who will just go along and be like, oh yeah, that is bad. It's so bad. You know what I mean? And they'll just kind of agree with everything you say. And then at the end, you're like, so like, yeah, do you want like a resource to go vegan? They're like, no, I'm good. You know what I mean? It's like, but you just agreed with everything. Like I thought like it seemed like we were on the same page. And so those people, I think, are people who are really there for the camera. There was one a few weeks ago. Yeah, a woman was there. And even when she came up, because she was like, oh, what are you filming? Like, do you have like a film crew? How big's your YouTube channel? Blah, blah, blah. And that was kind of more, I was like, okay. I was like, I'm going to have this conversation because I always have the conversation because you never know. But it did kind of end up going like how I thought it would, which was that it was like it was very outward facing. It was a very audience facing conversation for that person, you know. And so that's where I think it probably hurts you the most. But at the same time, having a camera there also draws people in because it's like what is that, like why do you have such a fancy camera, this must be serious, like I want to do this, you know.
And there are many people who are doing the same kind of thing. They're out there, recording themselves. And so many people are just really into that and they're drawn to that and they like the attention or, there's no exact, positive or negative in that way. Some people come for virtue signaling. Some people, it doesn't affect them. It's not an X factor at all. But kind of on that, what you were talking about the students that you were recently doing outreach at UPenn. Also Testify Redeem is asking, I heard you're from North Carolina. I'm from the South. Does it seem harder to reach people down here, down South? What demographic do you think, location and age and students and socioeconomics, have you noticed?
So the thing I've heard is that um, demographics are actually probably more divided by rural and city now than they are so much by like broader geographic regions. And so I live in a fairly progressive city. And so I don't know that it's like representative of the South writ large, because I tend to find that I have generally pretty good conversations where I'm at. There's a lot of college students around here. There's three big colleges. I mean, there's more than three colleges, but there's three big well-known colleges, which are Duke, UNC, and NC State. And so we have a big population of college students for sure. And just generally, even where I do most of my outreach are progressive areas. Like it's either near a college campus or it's like at a farmer's market, you know? And so I don't know that I could really answer the question like from the South's perspective very well because of where I'm at, despite the fact that I do in fact live in the South. Yeah, I'm guessing it probably breaks down more on city rural lines.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. I mean, it's purely anecdotal, of
Mhm.
course, but I notice when I do outreach with Anonymous for the Voiceless, when we do cubes, that there's a big difference. Like New York City seems to be where I have the best conversations, the most open, the most back and forth, rewarding kinds of conversations versus maybe doing it at a farmer's market in a small town,
Mhm.
which we don't do that very often, but definitely I noticed that as well. Sean has a question, which is, I know you've read a lot and think a lot about being effective and even what the movement needs. What do you think our movement needs most to get more traction in the next decade? Take out your
Uh,
crystal ball.
yeah, I think we need to shift culture and we need more activists. So, you know, we already know something like 1 to 3% of the population is vegan, right? So we have whole population, small fraction is vegan. And then an even smaller fraction, I don't know what the number is, are vegan activists. If every vegan was a vegan activist, we would be accelerate to a vegan world pretty quickly, I assume. Um, and so I think that's a really big thing is getting active in some way. And activism can look very different. So I think, we've been talking this whole time about street outreach, but that's not the only kind of activism. That's just a very visible kind. There's pressure campaigns. There's, things like fur protests. There's all sorts of things behind the scene that you can do. Like I was saying earlier, we tend to think of like you being the person out there holding a sign at a protest somewhere or talking one-on-one with someone. But you can be the camera person. You can be the person editing those videos. You can be the person flagging down someone to come and have the conversation while the person who's filming is like making sure they've got all their arguments and whatever down. And this is something I've done recently actually is I've brought people with me to do outreach and they help take care of some of those more logistical concerns so I can focus more on like having the conversation. And or yeah, like maybe you can design a website or help people do marketing. Like I said, like all those different things that are involved in YouTube, each of those could be a separate person, if you had that many friends. But you can get people to help on all those back end things. They don't have to be like out in the open talking. And so I think there's probably a ton of human ingenuity and innovation uh, to bring to bear there if every vegan got active in some way. There's other ways too. I mean, there's sidewalk chalk activism. I have to tell this story that the very first thing that ever got me thinking about veganism was I forget what city I was walking in. I was just walking down the street and there was chalk and it said, pigs are about as smart as a 3-year-old child. And I remember I stopped eating pig for like I don't know, maybe like 3 months or something like that. No, maybe a month, maybe 2 months, maybe 3 months. I did not eat pig body parts at that point. Um, I of course went back to my habit. I didn't really have any like outside pressure, but that's always been rattling around in my head since then. And I think that clearly in some way influenced when I did finally go vegan, right? Because it made me more open to like even probably watching vegan videos at some point. Or, if someone would just say something, if someone would say something wild, like, oh, it doesn't matter what happens to animals, I'd be like, well, I think it does matter what happens to animals. And they're like, well, are you vegan? I'm like, no, but I mean, I still think it's better than not being,
Yeah.
I think vegan is better than non-veganism. Like I remember asking my friends at one point, we are all just like sitting out back, this before I went vegan. And I was like, what do you think in 100 years we're gonna like look back on and be like, wow, I can't believe we did that. And everyone was saying different things. And I was like, I think it's gonna be pretty weird that we just like straight up killed animals to eat them. And everyone was like, really? Huh, I don't think so. I don't think anyone will think that's weird. And it was even then, right? So I'm not vegan yet, but clearly things have been rattling around in my head, right? Um, so, don't sleep on sidewalk chalk activism. Another thing I really like is also like wearing t-shirts that have a message on them. Super easy, super low opportunity cost. Once you have the t-shirt, you just wear it whenever you would wear a t-shirt. I have like lifting shirts, like muscle shirts that I wear to the gym that have vegan messages on them. And so now it doesn't cost me any like extra time to do that. I just put on the shirt that I wear to the gym every time, and it just happens now to be a shirt with a vegan message. And I get positive, it's fairly common that someone's like, "Oh, I like your shirt," or "That's a cool shirt." And sometimes they'll be like, "I'm vegan," So like there's all kinds of ways to get active. Stickering activism, writing Watch Dominion on things, putting Watch Dominion on little cards, and I don't know, leaving it in bathroom stalls or leaving it in public places or putting it under the windshield wiper of someone's car, whatever. There's all sorts of little ways to get active. So don't sleep on any of those. I think obviously if the only thing you're ever doing is, putting maybe putting like little cards under people's windshield wipers, I think that's great. But I think that is kind of like a stepping stone. You want to kind of use these little forays into activism, where you're getting your feet wet to sort of build up to maybe more substantial forms of activism. So I think getting more activists, people understanding that a lot of things that they maybe don't consider are activism are in fact activism, kind of like lowering those barriers and just getting people to start doing activism and then kind of build that habit.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it builds momentum. It absolutely does. It makes you want to do more once you, again, just getting started, just getting active. And you're right, we don't want to trivialize or downplay any form of activism. Certainly, it really all counts. We never know, we don't always know what impact we make. That person who chalked that message, they were gone. They never knew that you looked at it, that it started to plant some seeds and things weren't sitting well for you and it started to change your mind. And here you are paying it forward, for other people as well. So we challenge activists out there, do what you're doing, keep doing it, but do a little bit more, challenge yourself to do a little bit more, to try something new and different, or to do something daily, like set the bar, just something small daily. There's always something you can do. Inquisitive Vegan asks, how do you like to initiate an outreach conversation? Do you approach people, or do you have a sign or other visual aid that prompts people to approach you?
Yeah. Before I answer that, I do want to mention one more thing from the last question. Another really easy form of activism that I somewhat recently did a video on is Reddit activism. You can get enormous reach on Reddit, much bigger than many other platforms as far as like sheer numbers of views. And so do not sleep on Reddit. Definitely find things that you can post there, upvote vegan posts, make comments on vegan posts, give awards. There's all sorts of things you can do with Reddit. Reddit really, really has a high ceiling of views. And if people are interested in that, there is a video I did recently, an interview with someone who's really good at Reddit. So that's just like one other thing that I think is like maybe a sort of like underserved or underutilized outreach niche. As far as the question was, how do I approach people? So in my one-on-one activism, I just have a sign that says, help me grow my YouTube, answer thought-provoking questions. And I tried many different signs. That sign to me ended up being the best. So one thing I didn't talk about is another mindset. I like to think collaborative, not combative. I have all the, I know, I have all the little mnemonics, but I want a collaborative frame, not a combative frame. And collaboration goes both ways. And so the interesting thing about help me grow my YouTube, answer thought-provoking questions, is that they're coming up and helping me. You know what I mean? And so it immediately puts us in that collaborative framework and that collaborative mindset. And it also selects for people who want to get a little philosophical, who are in the mood to answer a thought-provoking question, right? So if I just say like, hey, answer these funny quiz questions, right? And someone comes up and I'm like, oh, what do you think about putting pigs in gas chambers? Like, that's going to be like a really hard, a hard turn for them that is probably going to like potentially upset them. And so by selecting it, they know it's going to be on YouTube. They're helping me out, which is cool. And they know it's going to be thought provoking. So they're already getting into that space of like, okay, this isn't necessarily going to be an easy question. This isn't going to just be like a puff interview, there's this thing too called the Benjamin Franklin effect, which is kind of interesting, which is like, we think what endears people to us is us doing things for them. And it definitely does. Doing things for people definitely helps build that relationship. But the Benjamin Franklin effect kind of works the opposite way. And it's that it actually endears people to you when they do a favor for you. And there's this anecdote from Benjamin Franklin where he had this person who he really disliked. It was some sort of statesman. And so in order to get on the guy's good side, he actually goes and is like, hey, you have like these books that I really want to read, because obviously Benjamin Franklin liked to read. And this guy had a big book collection. And so he was like, well, what if I just like asked him to like lend me these books? And so he asked the guy, and the guy kept lending him books. And eventually him and the guy became very good friends, you know. And one of the things they cite is that because that guy was doing him favors, your brain starts to say like, oh, why would I do this person a favor if I didn't like them? You know what I mean? That's the one theory as to why like this is like rapport building or whatever. But so there's a little bit of that in there, you know, that like if we're helping each other out, we're building this frame out that we have rapport already, that we're helping each other. And it's also natural to reciprocate. So when someone does something for you, naturally you tend to want to do something for them. Again, if you're not like a sociopath or a psychopath or something, right? And so like, again, we're kind of building up that rapport, building up that reciprocity, and framing things in a way that's going to hopefully reduce defensiveness as much as we can. That was something too that I noticed. You know, I think I've touched on this a bunch already. But when I was up at UPenn, I didn't have all those rapport building, and I definitely saw way more defensiveness than I do in my typical outreach videos. And I think that just speaks to how much just having a good structure and you know, kind of presetting the table in a way that allows you to succeed. It's so important. And that is something that, you know, you talked about, like, is this talent? Is this a certain disposition, or is this like learned? And that very much can be learned. You can just take that formula and like transplant it. So yeah, I think, did I answer the question? They want to know how I started out.
You
Okay,
did. You
okay.
explained your banner, your sign,
Yeah.
and what you say on it, and how you came to that. And I love the Benjamin Franklin effect. I heard about that recently too. It makes me think of the helper's high, like whenever we volunteer, same kind of thing. And altruism, it's speaking to the natural innate altruism in all of us, that we are do-gooders deep down somewhere, unless we are psychopathic or a sociopath. But those are the exceptions rather than the general rule. But let's see. So we're going to wrap up pretty soon. We're coming up against it, but there's a question here in the chat, though, I'll give to you. CDA Activism, what's your thoughts on intersectional veganism?
I was wondering if there was going to be a spicy question.
The best for last.
Yeah. So something that's interesting, this actually reminds me of something, because you asked me earlier about YouTube titles. Woke, privileged, intersectional all seem to do really well as far as getting clicks. So if you want to get clicks and you can find some way to put those into your title, those tend to be pretty spicy. So the problem with this question I had is that, like, defining what an intersectional vegan is so fraught. I actually had George Martin and Catherine Klein on my channel about a year ago talking about intersectional vegans. And by the end of it, I don't know that I was like still fully understanding exactly what an intersectional vegan was. My understanding of intersectionality runs more with, I guess, what the academic definition of intersectionality was. But in the discussion we had, it seemed that intersectionality, as used more colloquially, is actually a little different than my understanding. So I don't really know exactly what I think about it, because I don't know exactly to what it refers. What it seems to be talking about most of the time is, as activists, should we ever mention other causes? To what degree, I guess, kind of to what degree should we mention other causes besides veganism? If that's the question, I just kind of think it depends.
Yeah.
So veganism is going to be one of the most underserved social justice niches. And so I think there's a good reason, especially because we're such a small contingent, to really focus a lot of our activism on veganism as vegan activists. I'm not someone who says that therefore we should never, ever say anything about any other cause. I think that's totally fine to say things about other causes. We just have to recognize that there's a cost-benefit ratio to doing so. Oftentimes, when we weigh in on other causes, it can cause infighting in the vegan movement among other vegans who follow you. And so that's definitely something you got to weigh in, like how important is it to say this thing that you're saying versus how much infighting it will cause, versus how underserved that other thing is. So, if there's some huge hot button political issue, it may be really important to say something about it because it's very important. But a couple of things I guess I would consider is how underserved or overserved is that other topic. So if it's a topic where literally everyone is talking about it, I don't know how much adding your voice to that topic adds to it. And it likely will have, I'd say, a negative infighting effect within the vegan community. So maybe that's not a calculus you want to do. But it's just going to depend. You know what I mean? To me, the devil's in the details. Like, how important is this thing? How much is your voice going to matter? What's the chance that it creates some backlash in the vegan movement? I think the thing that I've seen with the intersectionality discussion and with infighting in general is that the problem with infighting isn't so much disagreeing on things, because I think we should, obviously we should critique each other as vegans. We should give each other, constructive feedback and things like that, both on our own activism and, if someone is like, if, one of your vegan friends is expressing a political view on some other matter, I think it's important to talk to them about it. Like, oh, I actually disagree with you on this political matter, which is fine. I think as long as you're doing it in like a pro-social relational way, But what I see is not so much, oh, we have this disagreement, and the disagreement, the material of the disagreement is the problem. It's the way that the disagreement happens, right? It's the form of it rather than the substance. And people will very quickly, degrade into, I think, like insults and getting snippy and being condescending and going off on like, grandstanding and things like that. And in the same way that these aren't good strategies for convincing non-vegans to consider veganism, I think these are bad strategies to convince someone of your position in general. And so, yeah, what I typically see in these debates is a problem of form rather than of substance. So yeah, that's what I would kind of focus on when we have disagreements in the vegan community, is getting better at having difficult conversations, and realizing that we're all going to sort of disagree on things, right? Like there's something called the narcissism of small differences. And it's something that pervades every movement, every sort of philosophy or ideology or whatever. And that's basically, as you get deeper into a philosophy or ideology or movement, you start to see differences, very subtle differences, or what would look like subtle differences to outsiders. And those start to get very loud in your mind, because you agree with these people on 99% of everything, and then this like 1% of this thing you don't agree with, then we focus on. And also it stops feeling like you're just disagreeing on 1%. It feels like now you're disagreeing on 50%, even though to an outsider it may look like almost nothing. Now, whether or not that is a big difference or isn't a big difference, is it really a small difference? I guess that depends on how you look at it. But I think those are important things for people to understand, is that like whenever there is infighting and whenever there is like these like, we're like really honing in on these very specific problems, just understanding that this happens in pretty much all movements. There's always these questions. There's always the narcissism of small differences. There's always the question of who is a true blank, right? Like, it's like, who is a true conservative? Who is a true leftist, right? Who is a true vegan? All these things always get played out. And so I think understanding that from a 30,000 foot view, that this is not unique to veganism, is important. But I think it's equally important to understand that the material of the disagreement is probably, I don't know if I'd say less important, but I think the thing that you want to focus on more, because people know their material facts and things like that they want to express. But I think it's the way that you express them that is actually probably more important, because I think the problem with infighting too is that like it really demoralizes people. I've seen many posts recently of people being like, I'm just gonna like be done with my social media because of this infighting. Like I'm turning off my social media, I'm getting off of Instagram, I'm getting whatever, this infighting, I can't take it anymore. And I don't think what those people can't take is that some people disagree with them or have different positions. I think what they can't take is how like acerbic and biting and, just antagonistic and non-relational the conversations are getting. Not that two people disagree on X and Y. Yeah, I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, no, that was better. That was beyond. That was really great. That was a very thoughtful answer, and it just makes me think again, let's keep in mind the golden rule, just treat others as we wish to be treated, should in theory take care of that. So I think that's wonderful. And I think we'll sort of stop there in terms of, questions and continuing this. Maybe we need to continue another time. And thank you everybody for your really amazing questions and this conversation. So Justin, I'll throw it back to you just, one more time. Do you have any final words? And please share your YouTube and your social, your IG.
Yeah, sure. So my YouTube is just Debug Your Brain, just 3 words, spaces, just like my name is appearing down there. And then Debug Your Brain, just all one word, is my Instagram. I've got Facebook and what's the other one? TikTok as well. I'm not really so active on those.
Yeah.
But mostly IG and Debug and YouTube. Final words. I think that really the most important thing is get out there and do something. You don't have to be, the most educated genius on all things vegan, all things outreach, all things video editing to start. Just do something, because you're going to have to actually get out there and fail to realize what you're good at, what you're bad at, and what you actually like.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't just sit in your armchair and like divine that through pure abstraction. You have to actually get out there and do something. So, get a camera, get your phone out, start recording yourself, walk out in the street and start talking to people, buy some stickers, buy some t-shirts, buy some chalk, go write something on the sidewalk. Just do something, please. We need more activists, and we desperately need them right now. And the best way you can get activists is to just start doing something.
I love it. I love how you're like pleading. You're like, please, please, please get off your couch a little. Yeah. Join a local group. Get out there. Okay, that's really awesome. So speaking of groups, local groups, Animal Activism Mentorship is an international group, but we got people all over. So I want to remind people of what we have going on. One thing is our Ohio occurrence. You can go to Ohio. If you're not in Ohio, it's okay. That's why we have these. That's August 1st through 4th. You can register. If you want to come, please register, whether you're going to be sleeping in Ohio or not, or just you need to register so we know how many people and who's coming. You can find that information on our social platforms, or maybe we'll get that in the chat for you. And please, again, subscribe to our YouTube channel while you're here. And when you have time, check out all our archived workshops. We have lots of them that go pretty far back, a few years. Follow us on social media. Please consider becoming a patron by finding AAM on Patreon. Your donations allow AAM to continue to provide free educational resources for activists, which ultimately saves more animals. So that wraps up another AAM program. Thank you, Justin, for your time and wisdom. Thanks, Trey, behind the scenes, handling the tech and our social media. Thank you all for being here and the tireless work you're doing for the animals. Keep it up, my friends. Stay strong and live vegan.
Thanks, everyone.